Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. Today, episode 88, we welcome Marc Bernardin to the podcast, co-host of Fat Man Beyond along with Kevin Smith, but also TV writer, producer, comic book writer, former journalist, book writer, whatever you want to call him. He's a writer extraordinaire, and he came to the podcast to talk his books, Adora in the Distance and Census, and we also touched on his short film that's coming out at some point in the future, Splinter. So check out this conversation with Marc Bernardin for episode 88. But before you do, visit us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Find Capes and Tights on there, as well as Apple, Spotify, and all your major podcasting platforms. Rate, review, all those things. 5 stars, please. But for episode 88, it's Marc Bernardin, writer of Adora in the Distance and Census, as well as a bunch of other things. Enjoy, everybody. Welcome to the show, Mr. Marc Bernardin. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. I'm doing well.
That's good. You sound good. That's a good thing right there.
Excellent.
It's like 9 degrees here in blistering sunny Maine. So
oh, Maine, man alive. Last time I was in Maine, I almost died in Maine.
Like because of the cold or because something else?
No, I was snowmobiling.
Oof.
And yeah, I have a buddy who's a big snowmobiler. So you should come to Maine. We're gonna go snowmobiling for like 4 days. So that sounds fun. And on the 4th day, I almost drove myself off a cliff. Didn't go off the cliff. Instead, went into a tree.
Oh.
and didn't quite like explode a snowmobile like I hoped it would, like Die Hard 2. Like yeah. I was hoping that I was gonna have awesome, cool snowmobile shit happen. Instead, I just got like a bad concussion.
Yeah, that's not what I want your memories from Maine to be, though. Like, that doesn't seem like it's fun.
No, I mean, it was fun until it wasn't. Which I find most of life is, it was fun until it wasn't.
Yes, exactly. And that's, we're safe in my studio here. We're not no snowmobiles are gonna come in. We're fine. It's gonna be good. We're gonna talk comic books.
Excellent.
But obviously, you're a writer extraordinaire, as I like to call you. You have a variety of different things you have your little hands on. I said little hands. You don't have Trump hands. Don't worry. You have hands. Okay.
I mean, they're handsy, I guess.
But you have your hands in. But like, we do pop culture stuff here at the podcast, but we mainly talk about comic books. But I'd love to know, like, what you probably said it a million times to different people, but like, what's the comic book origin story for Marc Bernardin? Like, how did you start collecting, reading, and being involved in comic books?
My origin story is, I imagine, like lots of people's origin stories are, not my fault, which is like my dad came home one day with a paper bag filled with like 6 or 7 comics in them, especially comics he should not have bought me. Like, he was buying me like Savage Sword of Conan books when I was like 11, when it was, wait, they're just making comic books about this stuff? And like, he's going to let me read this? Like, there's a lot of sex in here. Yes. And a lot of violence in here. And, curse words that I can tell are curse words, even though they're not, the 7 deadly words. But even still, and that was I'm going to go, where'd you get these? The comic book store? I want to go back to the comic book store. And that was sort of the entry for me into comics as a medium, was the black and white, like Ernie Chen, Buscema, Barry Windsor Smith, Savage Sword of Conan books. And then when I got to the comic book shop, it was the Incredible Pulp. I remember the name of it, Incredible Pulp in Baldwin, Long Island, which I think is no longer there. But I walked in and it's too much. Like, if you go into a comic book store, it's just sensory overload. You don't know what the hell you're doing. And so I didn't know where to start, Marvel or DC. I mean, there was no way in, and they were not entirely welcoming to fresh blood from the outside. And so my first ever like superhero comic book was Marvel's Secret Wars, which did what it was designed to do.
Yes.
Which is, it's the sampler buffet of superheroes. Of everything Marvel had, it's all in this one book. And so that became my like, oh yeah, sure, I'll hit this part of the buffet and this part of the buffet and the X-Men and Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and we'll do it all. And that was the first book that I collected. I remember like buying each issue and then just putting them all flat on my dresser top so that I had the tile of my 12 comic books that I owned. And from there I went to X-Men and Spider-Man, and then eventually slowly worked my way back around to DC. and got into like Dark Knight and Watchmen were my, not bad ways in to DC, I think.
Yes.
And then like the indie comics boom. This was mid late 80s.
Yeah.
So, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was huge. Remember that being a really big deal. And I had like the first, and I don't know what the hell I did with them. I might have sold them for like a prom limo that I was trying to rent. But I had like first editions of the first 5 or 6 issues of TMNT. And then those are gone.
Well, I feel like that's like the most common story of those issues. It's like, I know someone who had them. Like,
Right.
There's a very little number of people that I know say, I still have this beautiful comic book. Look how great it is. It's more like, I think my dad took the pizza order on one of those a while back. And like, I think it went in the trash and stuff like that. I actually spoke with Kevin Eastman earlier or late last week and to talk about Turtles and The Last Ronin and all that stuff and stuff like that. And he's actually a Mainer to his own right because he was born up here too. So that Kevin Eastman indie comic book scene back in the day connection to the podcast here being from Maine. But yeah,
for sure,
those early editions of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are not very widely available to people nowadays.
No, I mean they only made a couple thousand of those things, and they're all gone now.
No, they're not anymore. You obviously then became a writer, to your own right. You write obviously TV shows and you've written some graphic novels and things like that. What got you into the comic book writing side of things?
It was being a comic book journalist first.
Yes.
It was loving comics, loving them to death, and then kind of breaking faith with them a little bit. Like I think everybody has that moment, especially if you're an old ass man, of chasing some massive cross-line crossover that touches like 12 or 15 books that a publisher puts out. And I remember, I think it was the Extinction Agenda for me and Marvel. I was an X-Men fan, and suddenly I've got to buy 15 X books, and I can't make any sense of it, and it's too much. It all got to be too much. And I was just like, I threw up my hands, and I was like, I'm done with it.
Yes.
And it was a while before I kind of looped back into it, and that was when I was a journalist. And I had a boss who would get the big box for Marvel and DC, the comp box, where they would send certain journalists every issue of everything that came out that month. And so he would go through first and pick what he wanted to read. And then the rest of us got to like hyenas, like pounce upon the big box of glory. And that was sort of my way back into reading comics and buying comics. And then when I went to Entertainment Weekly, it was at that weird sort of soft point between like X-Men had come out, Blade had come out, and Spider-Man was on the horizon. And that was a very like defining point between those two worlds where like X-Men was popular and Blade did very well for the movie that they thought it was, but it wasn't Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man blew up. Spider-Man was massive. And Spider-Man was the one that made people realize, oh, maybe comic books can work in the movies, like without being afraid of what they were. Like the X-Men, while I love X-Men 2, I appreciate X-Men 1, but they ran as far as they could away from what it meant to look like a superhero. Like put them in black leather. But what about the blue and the yellow? What about the brown and the yellow? What about the costumes? Like, nope, it's just the Matrix. Yes. Just doing the Matrix, you guys.
Yes.
And so Spider-Man was big, and I was able to convince my bosses at Entertainment Weekly to let me cover comic books on a monthly basis. Like we had 3 pages in the back of the magazine. In the review section, it was like movies, TV, books, comics. And by doing that, I got to go to my first conventions and I got to meet people who made comics. And comics is a relatively small business. I try to tell folks that like trying to break into Hollywood is trying to break into Fort Knox. Trying to break into comics is like trying to break into a 7-Eleven.
Yes.
Like it's still hard, but it's not impossible. And you've seen people do it. And so I was able to walk around and meet editors and publishers and other writers and artists. And after a while, they'd be like, hey, you can write, and clearly you like the stuff. Did you ever think about writing comic books? And I said, yes, I did.
I did.
And I still do.
It still do, exactly. It's funny how you see that there's I talked to a person named Trace Dean a couple weeks ago who writes for a variety of different publications, but he also just released in 2022 his first comic book, or one of his first comic books, We Ride Titans, over at Vault. And he's like, okay, I did it. When another story and something worthwhile and I have time to do again comes along, I will write it. But other than that, I'm going to stick to my journalism. He's like, I did it. I crossed it off the list. Good to go. Next thing to happen on the journalism side. So it's funny how you transition. And then you basically went in from transitioning from, journalism side to full on, you write things for a living that are not more, I mean, you obviously have some journalistic side of things with, you and Kevin doing some things. Obviously the podcast, I would guess it's more on the journalistic side than it is the creative side. If you want to call it journalist, no,
right. I mean, it's funny though, because I remember when I was still at EW and covering comics and starting to write comics, I started doing the math. I was like, all right, I know what I make. I know what my page rate is. How many comic books would I need to write in order for me to be able to quit my job? And the number was too high. And I understood that it was possible. Like I saw people like Fraction do it. I saw people like Hickman do it. I saw people, there were folks who had started indie books, made it to Marvel or DC, and then just went for it. And like those guys were writing like 6 books a month. And I know myself well enough to know that that's too many books for any of them to have been good.
You're right about like it's funny how you say that though, because like those people also write really good books. So it's not even like they stumbled on it. They have to write a bunch of books and they write really good books.
Yeah, they totally do. Like Bendis, is great. And he was doing like a whole lot of work. And I'm not fast enough. At the time, I was just new at it. And I just doing the math, I was like, I can't. This is not sustainable. For me to like, I might be able to convince them to give me 6 books a month to write, but they all wouldn't be good regularly enough that I'd keep writing 6 books a month. And so it became for me like, I love comics and I love writing comics, but it was never going to be the thing that made the money, that made the engines go. And it was comics that led me to television, which I always loved television, because I'm a fucking person who grew up in the 20th century. So of course you love television. Yeah. Anybody who doesn't, I don't believe. It's like, I don't watch television. I don't like television. Yeah. Bullshit. But yeah, it was as an agent who read the first issue of Genius, who was like, oh, I think I could tell this as a TV show. And I said, I'd sure like to see you try, because I don't believe you. Yes. And he didn't. But he did say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I think I want to write television. He says, okay, well, here's the 4 things you need to do to make that a possibility. If you're willing to do them, then we can give it a shot. And so TV felt as if like, oh no, I could do that and make a living. Like I could do that and pay my mortgage and put shoes on these kids and food in their mouth. Whereas comics was always the long shot. It was always the like, for every Kirkman, there's, 1,000 guys who are just doing it because they love it. And there's no shame in that. But I couldn't at that point be that person.
Yeah.
And so comics for me remains the thing that I do because it's the most fun. And then I do because the barrier between me and an audience is gossamer thin. If I'm making a TV show, if I'm writing a movie, there's 400 people who at some point need to say this is fine in order for it to become the thing that it is, for it to reach an audience. But comics, there's like 4 people, maybe. There's an artist, there's a letterer, there's an editor, there's a publisher. And half the time the publisher doesn't even read this stuff.
Yes.
And so the personal nature of it, the ability to tell a story that is not compromised in any way by anybody else, I think only exists in literature, only exists in novels and comics.
And you have that, I mean, now you have a home where you've released a couple books with a ComiXology originals, but like, if you really wanted to, you're like, I have a story to tell. If you want to tell Adora in the Distance, you could have just gone to Kickstarter and done that. And I feel like you have enough reach now that you could do what you wanted to do, write the story you wanted to do with the person you wanted to write it with or create it with, and release it. Whereas if you're doing it for a living, like you have to make this book, you might be being told what to write and what to do. And it takes some of the fun out of it as well.
Does, but I'm also a big enough boy to realize that like, yeah, no, there's always going to be compromise. There's always going to be, a certain amount of like, if this is where the money is, then this is what the work has to be. And then finding a way within that to be satisfied. Like I didn't have any real overarching desire to write a Peter Parker story. But like Marvel asked me, it's like, hey, we're doing these one shots and we have this Peter Parker, the Amazing Shutterbug. It's like, well, what is it? It's like, well, it's what if Peter Parker was never bitten by a bug? It's like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Like I can find my way into telling a story there that satisfies me as a creator, but also satisfies them as a publisher. Like there's always a way to make those two, disparate poles meet, but it's not quite like, here's my idea. Here's what I want to say, and let's just go say it.
But there's also, like I said, this, if you had that Shutterbug story wasn't something you wanted to write, you could have said no. But if you absolutely needed the paycheck to get your stuff done because you didn't have other work you were doing, you would have potentially said yes anyway, just to pay the bills. And that's totally. the thing about doing it kind of on the side. Like you're a TV writer and, work on TV right now for your most of your stuff. And then you have these different projects you can work off the side that help pay the bills, but aren't your sole income, which is nice.
The greatest gift that any creative person can have is the ability to say no. Is the ability to just be able to say, that's not for me. I don't think I could do that well. I don't want to do that. I'm going to say no. And so not only does it give you a little bit of sort of confidence and self-awareness and self-esteem, but it actually makes you somewhat more desirable to other people who just kind of like the chase. Like, oh, he says no for this. Maybe we can get him to say yes for that, or whatever it is. But to just know what you want to do and have the capacity to chase that thing is a liberty that I don't take lightly, because not everybody has.
You obviously, I mentioned Adora in the distance. For those who are going to be listening to this, I'm holding it up right here so you can't actually see it, but Adora in the distance is one of those ones. When I originally tried to get this, it was sold out, and then they had to make some more of them for you. Because people like it.
It is my first ever sellout, and I feel pretty good about that.
It's an excellent thing. It's an excellent book. I mean, Ariella, I can't say it. How do you say her last name? Do you know?
Kristantina.
Okay, Kristantina is excellent at the artwork in this book. And so if anybody hasn't read it, you can read it on ComiXology, which is nice. But you also can pick it up. Dark Horse has released it in trade paperback format as well, which is amazing. I mean, technically, is it just called the trade paperback, or is it actually just a graphic novel? Because it's
I think it's just a graphic novel. It's just an OGN. Because we're not collecting anything.
Yeah, it's just graphic. Exactly. You're collecting pages from a. They're not even actually pages because they were digital, right? But yeah, the ComiXology originals is nice because I like to read. I like to physically, personally hold it and glance through things and look at it again in a different medium. But I'm a big lay in bed at night, iPad on a holder, read it that way. So ComiXology obviously makes it easy for that.
Wow.
How did Adora in this instance end up at ComiXology? Like, how did that happen?
It happened because and the book is, for those of you out there who don't know, it is the long-term sort of comic book passion of my life. Like I had the idea for this a good 15 years ago. And it's very much inspired by my experience raising a child who's on the autism spectrum. And so when my daughter was first diagnosed, she's now 20, and she was diagnosed at like 2.5. The idea of writing about it started to form, but I had no idea what that form would take. I just knew that I didn't want it to be this sort of memoir. I didn't want it to be the sad / triumphant story of a parent raising a kid, on the spectrum, and the challenges and the triumphs and the heartbreaks and the whatever, because that made it a story about me. And I always felt that I was the least interesting person in this particular dynamic. She's the one with the mystery. She's the one with the story. And because I am the nerd that I am, that sort of manifested in a, what if? Most stories are what ifs, but it's a what if story. But what if this is what's happening in her head when she can't communicate with us? What's going on in there? What adventures is she unwilling to leave to come and join us in the real world? What's going on in her head was the question. And so I just started kind of pulling it together, and, months would pass, years would pass, and new ideas would kind of show up. And then I started pitching it around once I kind of knew what it was. And nobody wanted to bite. Everybody was interested, but nobody wanted to bite. I pitched it to DC, I pitched it to Vertigo, I pitched it to Wildstorm, I pitched it to almost every publisher that I had any contact with.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was like, this is beautiful. I don't think it's for us. And like, I respect that. I get it. You know, or you think you know what is best for your publishing line. All good. And then I almost kickstarted it once. At this point now, like 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago. And the artist that I had was wonderful, but she kind of flaked on me. And so I, had these character designs and know what place to go with them. And so then they just kind of faded away. And then I got a call from Chip Mosier, who I had known in various comics iterations, both as a journalist and as a creator. And he's like, well, I'm doing this thing at ComiXology. We've got this deal that we think is better than the Image deal. Is there anything that you love? Is there anything that you're passionate about? Is there anything that the great work that you've been wanting to do that you want to do with ComiXology? And then I sent him the script, which had been written, of Adora. I was like, yeah, this is the one. And he's like, I love it. Let's do it. And that was pretty much it. That was pretty much it. There wasn't a ton more negotiation. There wasn't a ton more back and forth. It's like I said it to him, told him what it was, told him what it meant to me. It's like, all right, well, that's the thing we're going to do. Go find an artist.
Exactly. And then you ended up partnering up with Ariella, and it turned out to be beautifully done. And I like how you did that, like the way that telling a story almost in the idea of it's from the point of view of your daughter. I mean, how does she take in this book now? I mean, I'm guessing now at 20 years old, she's read the book.
No, she's not there yet. She may never get there yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's that is the sort of tragedy of the book, is that I wrote it inspired by her, and she'll never read it. She might flip through the pages, but won't get anything out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But her favorite movie ever is Finding Nemo, and I think it's because of the color palette. I think she just likes the blues and the purples and all that stuff. So there's very specifically parts in this book that are all blues and purples, that are all kind of awash with what feels like underwater. And it's like, yeah, all right, that'll be for her. That's her little part of the book.
That's amazing. I just love the whole idea behind it. My mom is a paraprofessional in Connecticut, and she works with students with special needs. And so every time I think of, like, I was like, I think just being in relation with people with different needs and abilities as us, as I would consider, I hate to say normal human beings, but the average human being, is that I think she would love to read this, even though she's not into comic books. I got my dad the Elvis graphic novel that came out last year, a couple years ago. I think it won a Ringo Award because he's a big Elvis fan. So I was like, oh, that would be perfect to give him, because it's my way of saying I love comic books. We force this down your throat. No, and I said, so I got this, and I want to get her another copy. I want to keep this one obviously for myself, but I want to send a copy to my mom. And be like, you just need to read this, because I think you would get it more than even I get it, just because of your work with people who you have utter patience for the people you work with, and I respect that. I think that this would be a great thing for her to read, and so I'm actually kind of happy that there's something I could give my dad and my mom. My dad, like, we gave it to him via Zoom, and literally, like, because I mailed it to him. He lives in Connecticut, a couple hours away, and I think my dad, I go, Dad, you read that book? He goes, I read it while we were on the Zoom. I go, that is the one downside to the medium of comic books and graphic novels, is the fact that it can get expensive if you're very fast at absorbing the content.
Oh, totally. So, yeah,
but
that was always the hope, was that I knew as a parent, and finding my way into that entire society and community, that there are more people who have experience with somebody who is, neurally atypical, than actually anybody had any sense of. And most people have some touch of that in their lives. If not personally, then there's a friend or a niece or a nephew or a cousin or an uncle or whatever who is somewhere on the spectrum. And everybody has a little bit of that experience. And so the audience, the market for this, purely, like, if you're going to be just purely mercenary about it, being like, no, there's people who would buy this book. If they know what it is, they would buy it because this is also part of their lives too. And and I was always very careful about, like, I understand that there are travelers in this space who occasionally, neurally typical writers writing about neurodivergent characters can be touchy. And so I was always trying my best to be very careful and respectful of that particular community, and never ever talking down to anybody, and never ever talking, treating it as if it was a thing to be cured, was never the plan. And it seems as if, for better or worse, we hit the right zone in that regard.
And it's great because I feel like it's a book, it's young adult, but in the same sense, I really kind of hate that title. Calling it young adult, because there's just like, I feel like the majority of regular, you mentioned pretty mature comic books at the beginning of the episode here, but like your regular everyday typical Spider-Man story is a young adult story in a sense. If you think about it, it's not like superly overly graphic, and it's not like, doesn't deal with a lot of big people things. So like a young adult thing is kind of funny to me, that this book, if you never told me it was a young adult graphic novel, I might have just been like, cool, this is a great book.
Yeah, I mean, most content in the world is not overwhelmingly mature. Like Casablanca is not a mature watch. Like, there's no sex, there's hardly any violence, there's no profanity. Like, it is just a story. It is just narrative, and most narrative is all ages. We just have found ways to slice that, probably to help sell it easier. But like, yeah, sure, there's stuff on either spectrum.
Yes.
But by and large, most of everything is for everyone.
And so I hope it doesn't turn people off that it's a YA book, if you just remove that from it. But I think that one of the greatest, my favorite horror novels over the past, or books over the past couple of years, was A Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. And that book is technically considered a young adult horror book. And it's like, it's on that borderline of like, I can understand why it's like that, because it's fairly easy to read and all that stuff. But it's like, they're about to make a movie out of this thing, and it's definitely not going to be like no scenes with blood or something like that. Like, it's going to be pretty mature, and it's a weird kind of crossover. The fact that that's called a young adult. He's like, every once in a while, he sees, he goes to like a Barnes and Noble, and there's like 3 copies of his book. He'll grab one of them out of the young adult thing and just bring it to the horror section and put it in the horror section so people can stumble upon it. But yeah,
Smart.
it's like, yeah, because it is true. I mean, it's not like this says young adult right across the top of it, so you could put this anywhere. And actually, my LCS here in Maine, Galactic Comics, he had actually never even heard about it. Mainly, I don't. He's the distribution, I can't even wrap my head around him trying to order books. It confuses me. And so when I said, hey man, I really want this book, could you see if you can find it? He couldn't, it was sold out. And then a couple months later, he was like, oh, I could find it. And so he grabbed it. He ended up buying 2 or 3 copies for the shop because he liked the way that, and he listens to me quite often too. So he's like, I'm like, oh crap, don't do that, because if no one buys it, that seems like it's my responsibility.
You did it.
But like, so he had it, and he actually has sold a couple. So I'm pretty excited about that. And we actually have a book club, a graphic novel club that we do at the shop that I would been recommended. I mean, it's like 15,000 books we have on a list to read. But I thought this would be a great one to read if we wanted to invite families. Like, instead of like, a lot of times we're reading like Something's Killing the Children, which obviously wouldn't invite a young kid to. But this, I could understand, like being a teenager or something like that, inviting him and having that over there. But that was released at ComiXology. Not to switch gears completely, but then you ended up with Census. Is that because of because of this book that you ended up going over to Census, or did that?
It was my experience with Adora was rosy enough and wonderful enough that, and I think both ways, that Chip said, "What else you got? What else do you want to do?" And I was like, "Oh well, I got this other thing that I've always kind of liked." He's like, "What is it?" And pitch it to him. He's like, "All right, that's cool." That seems to be the way ComiXology worked. Was, oh, that's cool, let's do that then. And I think,
is that what the contracts say?
Yeah, let's do that.
1 page. Let's just do it, and then you sign it. That's it.
That's cool. We'll do it, right? Yeah. And it was, I mean, it's a different speed for sure than Adora is. It's not YA, except that it's totally YA. Like it's a sitcom. It's a what's the weird predicament you're going to put your protagonist in every week. And it was, also an idea that was long gestating, inspired by my growing up in New York. I was born in the Bronx and grew up on Long Island, and the first 20 professional years of my life were spent in Manhattan. And so that feeling of being able to walk down those streets, and there's 1,000 million doors everywhere you go. So, well, what's behind those doors? Yeah, I remember being in the middle of Manhattan, nowhere in any sight anywhere of the water. And we're passing by this like just door that had the most immaculate stenciling on it that just said the Water Club. I was like, what the hell is the Water Club? And why is it so far from the water? And why does it look like it's some like, the secret hideout for the Society of Extraordinary Gentlemen or something like that? Like, why does it look, arcane? And then it was like, I bet you there's a ton of doors like that here that nobody knocks on. But what if it was somebody's job to do that? And I'm pretty sure that we probably had just gone through a census or something, and I remember that in my head. And it was a relatively simple pitch. And finding Sebastian Perez, who I just found on Twitter, like I
Oh,
just saw his artwork just pop up. It's like, dude, do you want to do a comic book?
yeah. I'm so glad you did too, because I slept on this person too. Like I just had a long conversation with the comic book store owner in my town about Sebastian and how did I miss this artist? Like I could go hours on his Instagram. Like I have some comic book tattoos, and I'm like, how
Mhm.
many of these can I get on my arm? Because this is amazing. And then I stumbled on the fact that he actually has done things for like the We Ride Titans book I mentioned earlier from Trace Dean. He did the art on that one. He's doing art on some newer things that came out recently too. And I was just like, books over at Mad Cave, and I'm just like, this person has been making comic books, and how did I just completely forget about this? And then when ComiXology sent over the Census issues for me to read too, and I'm like, oh my god,
This
this guy is
guy.
everywhere. And you
Yeah,
obviously co-wrote that with Adam Freeman too, right?
I did. Yeah. I mean, and I've known Adam since I was 11 years old. Um, we went to elementary school together and
Okay.
then high school together. And, we were in a dumbass rock band just after college together. And we started writing comic books together. And so this was an idea that we had come up with together. And I love writing with Adam when I get the chance to do it. And Adam's funnier than I am, and so when we were going to do a comedy, it's like, well, of course, like
Freeman, yeah.
you need that speed as well. And that's why Sebastian was also so
Yes.
necessary, because you needed somebody who could not just draw the fantastic, but who could get just the acting on the faces. Like if you can't convey character, it's impossible to really do comedy and make it land. Then it becomes like a
Mhm.
short story you're reading as opposed to a comic book you're ingesting. And Sebastian got every dumb look we wanted on Liam's face. He got every ridiculous sort of, having tea with Cthulhu, the
Yes.
absurdity of all that. Like he killed it. He nailed it.
And if, for anybody who was listening to this who doesn't realize, Liam, so the solicitation for at least issue one is Liam gets his first real job counting demons for the underworld census. But can he keep his job, his life? Most importantly, can he keep his pants? Find out now. And so that's a great solicitation. First of all, it fits so perfectly. But I think when I was reading this too, I think it was during like I can remember a lady coming to my door with a mask on during the pandemic doing the census recently. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, how much she might have been annoyed with knocking on people's doors just because it seems like a very tedious and probably people don't want to talk to her and stuff like that. And how I sat in the inside being like, I don't want to talk to this person and so on and so forth, let alone the underworld. Like I just can't imagine if she's knocking on the door, not knowing what to expect and not knowing what could happen potentially. Does see something that you would laugh about, and so I could totally see it as a sitcom, like an actual like adaptation to TV, because I think it would be hilarious to watch on a regular basis on whatever streaming platform
Yeah.
nowadays.
No, it's funny. Like everything that I do in TV is, it's very like serialized and
Yeah.
it's a little deep and intense. And then here's just a fucking sitcom. I think it's the
Yes.
only one I've ever come up with, which is like, yeah, this is just like half an hour.
Yeah.
We'll just breeze in. We'll do some weird supernatural shit. We'll breeze out. Nobody's actually going to die until they actually do. Um, but it's never very heavy. Like, and I sort of like that. I appreciated the let's do a book that doesn't sound like it's carrying the weight of the world, but still being able to talk about stuff. I mean, there's a couple passages as we get into issues 3 and 4, where we're chasing ghosts in Manhattan, and so what does that mean? Who's not alive in Manhattan anymore? Where are these ghosts from? And and then being able to have a larger conversation about like, well, what do we choose to forget? As people, as society, as a country, what and who, which stories do we not want to remember?
Mhm.
You know, and it's gotten important to me in the last 10 years or so, to even when you're doing like dumb shit, even when you're doing like the silliest stuff, it's just, can there be a thing to say
Mhm.
in there? Like one of the reasons why I was very excited to do that Peter Parker story was because I wanted to talk about the rage that comes when it seems like you're not living the life you're supposed to live. And it doesn't have to be, I don't have to beat anybody's head over it, but I thought that was like the crux of it, is the Peter Parker feels like he should be doing more and isn't. And then what happens when that frustration gives way Like it's very Yoda. And the frustration gives way to anger, and then who preys on that anger of the useless, of the unfulfilled, and to have Uncle Ben be the family that survives as opposed to Aunt May, to be able to sit Peter down and tell him, it's like, hey man, I see where this is going. I know what's going to happen, and I can't let you be this guy anymore. You know, like, yeah, it's a page in a Spider-Man book, but it was an important page for me to have in there.
Well, I'm just glad you do that as well, because of the fact that I don't think people realize that you can tell. I don't know why I always use the terminology that like people laugh and tell jokes at a funeral, even though it's a very solemn and sad moment. There's still people who are laughing. There's someone who farted. There's something that happens at the funeral that is lighthearted enough to realize that, yes, we're here for a somber moment, but there can be some comedy in there. And I almost relate that to some of the Marvel movies where there's like serious things happening, but someone's cracking a joke. And the same thing with a comedy sitcom where you're trying to say, I want to say something real. There's no like rules that you can't make it more have some sort of wider meaning or bigger meaning than just a comedy. And I'm glad some people like yourself are starting to put that into place and actually forming things around. You know, I've read countless of comic books and talked to people on here about how they're using a medium like comic books to say something bigger, although they're saying a joke or doing some sort of meaningless thing in the comic book itself.
Yeah, you know, and it's a thing that I'm not going to say I came around to it by accident, but you know, discovering, especially listening to like George Lucas talk about Star Wars, you know, which is it's the source, it's the mother well from everything from which all springs, right? Star Wars is the first movie I ever saw. It's my first science fiction. It's the reason why I do all the things I do, is because I saw Star Wars at 6. And for him, Star Wars is a story about rebellion. It's a story about, you know, a giant, it's a Vietnam allegory for him, you know, and never more so than when you get to Return of the Jedi, but it's the giant galactic empire is the United States, you know, and then the rebels who are kind of fighting against it are everybody who's ever fought against that kind of tyranny, you know, and like it's deeply political for him, you know, and whether or not we as an audience choose to kind of understand it, it's all there. You know, we might have been too young to see it. We might now not want to see it, but it's always been political. It's always been about, you know, the rebel upstarts fighting against the giant, you know, all-consuming empire. And yeah, America was the upstarts once, and now we've become what we beheld. And so what does that mean? And so realizing that, it's given me a little bit of solace to be like, well, yeah, no, you can make the dumbest popcorn thing in the world, but it can still be about something. Like Thor Ragnarok can be the silliest movie ever, but it's also about refugees. It's also about people who don't have a home, you know, and what does home mean? Home is not a place, it's a people. Like that is a deeply allegorical political film that is also crazy funny, you know, and actually like deeply emotional. You can do that.
You can do all of it. It's not, you don't have to pick a lane and stay in it. You know, obviously you don't want to go all over the place, but like there's a way to thoughtfully put it together to the point where multiple different avenues can be achieved by one piece of medium. And that's like I said, that's not to get too deep in this, but that's what Census is, in my opinion. In that sense, a sense of the book itself is that, and your partnership with Adam is great. Obviously, your names are on a lot of things together, as well as Sebastian's artwork's amazing, and the letterer on both Adora and Comics,
Bernardo Bryce.
Bernardo, is on both those as well. Which is amazing too. But I wanted to mention something really quickly before I forget about Census, and you mentioned New York City and stuff. I was just listening to your recent Black Man Beyond episode, and you talked about obviously people who had drawn like Luke Cage and things like that had never actually been to there. Well, we mentioned it because this recently had a guy named Travis Gibb on, who's a writer, has a book coming out for Scout, who is based in Rochester, New Hampshire, a couple hours from where I live here in Maine. And I said, what's great about it is that it's based in Rochester, New Hampshire, and the streets are basically, you know, Rochester, New Hampshire, but he knows those streets. He's been there. And I said, that's funny how I was like, just listening to this episode before I started talking to you about them talking about that on the podcast about you can tell someone's never been there. When you look at it, go, that's supposed to be Harlem, but I don't think that really looks like
Not quite. That looks a lot like Toronto.
Yes. Well, that's like a Stephen King movie, right? That's supposed to be Maine, but that looks a lot like Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, hell, when I was working on Castle Rock, you know, we did not shoot in Maine. because you couldn't get it done. So
Nope.
we shot in Orange, Massachusetts. We're like, well,
Mhm.
I feel
It's
like it
close.
kind of looks
At
like
what point they were the
Maine-ish.
same? At one point they were the same state, right? That
Yeah,
counts.
it's all the same region of the world.
It's
It's all got
we,
the same weather beaten clapboard on the side of the
it's,
houses. Like I get it.
there's a whole article someone wrote for the local newspaper, or wrote local like TV webpage or whatever about how state of Maine needs to start having TV tax or TV or movie tax incentives, tax breaks for people to come and film in Maine, because it would be perfect for people to do that. And one of the biggest things was that Stephen King has had very little, if any, actual scenes shot in Maine, even though most of his stories are based in Maine. And we take a lot of pride in the fact that he's from Maine. But like, yeah, it's just kind of funny how
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
if
glad
I had
someone
to
wrote. Go ahead.
if I had to guess, I'd say it's because the weather in Maine
Yes.
is great for a little bit
Yes.
and then becomes impossible.
Well, I loved. I mean, you obviously you talked on the podcast, Fat Man Beyond, about The Last of Us and the fact that was it episode 1 where they said 10 miles or 20 miles west of Boston, and I'm like, I used to live 20 miles west of Boston, and it's not what it looked like.
No,
There was
no.
mountains and a stream and stuff like. I'm like 20 miles west of Boston. I lived in Lowell. That was a pretty like they did not look like that.
Yeah, I've been to a bunch of Worcesters and Gloucesters and all of those stores. They don't look anything like this.
I just love how it just got roasted online about all these people from New England and Massachusetts going, that's not what it looks like. I think you guys are a little crazy, but
Yeah, nice try.
they had to walk that far. It had to be written in the writing, but the show is amazing, and I'm excited for the future of the show, particularly how it ends up and it goes into season 2. But Census is amazing. It's available on ComiXology as well. Is there? I don't know how does that deal with ComiXology and Dark Horse working? Is that eventually going to get a trade paperback?
It will.
Or is that
it will?
It will.
It the last I heard was that it's a early 2024 release to give ComiXology time to squeeze every last drop out of the digital stone that they can, and then much like Adora, I think Adora was a slightly faster interim, but actually no, it was like a year. It was actually a year between the digital pub and then the print pub, and so I think it's about the same for Census.
And it's great because, I mean, like I said, I like to read digitally a lot, but I also am a completionist to the point where I want a lot of physical copies. And a lot of times I'm a floppy kind of guy. I like the floppy comic books. And so like even for the graphic novel club that I'm in where we read it, a lot of times I have issues 1 through 5, but I still go to the shop and buy the trade so that I have the actual trade. And some of them, like we just read Something's Killing the Children, and I'm not cracking open the CGC case to read issue 1. I have to buy the trade. But your main job is working in TV and movies, mainly TV, but you just did a short film. Do you mind us chatting a little bit about Splinter a little bit? Or?
No, not at all. Splinter was the fulfillment of a promise that I made to myself that when I was like 45 years old, I said, by the time I turn 50, I want to have written and directed a movie. The time I was like, feature film, let's go, shoot the wad. Didn't end up being a
trilogy.
A trilogy. Let's just do it all. And then we started physical production. We started like our first shot was a week after my 50th birthday. COVID found a way to screw everything up. But it was inspired by the Twilight Zone. It was inspired by that kind of the moral quandary that was always at the center of every episode of the Twilight Zone. Like what would you do? Is the question that each episode is asking. And Twilight Zone always had an episode on a plane, and they always had episodes with creepy ass children. And so I figured I would synthesize the two and posit that there's a plane that never lands, that only has 1 passenger. And if that passenger ever sets foot on the ground, he's a splinter in the world. Like rage, chaos, violence ensues. And so this is his prison that he's got to live in for the entirety of his life. And then what happens when that plane crashes is the crux of the thing. And we went on Kickstarter and raised way more money than I thought we would raise. Up until the morning that we turned it live, I remember telling Kevin, I was like, man, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to have to assume an identity at the end of this, drop a giant wad in the bucket to hump us over the finish line on day 30. And it was like, man, you don't understand. Like, you don't know the depth of this audience. We've never asked them for anything. We've never asked them for a dime. And now they have an opportunity to give something back to the one of us who's asking for something.
Yes.
He was like, I ask for enough shit. I ask for
Yes.
the reboot tours. I ask for this. I ask to buy my merch. I ask all that stuff. You've never asked them for anything, and so now's the time that they get to give back.
Mm-hmm.
And we made our nut in the first 12 hours. We
Yes.
made what we were looking for in 12 hours, and by the time we ended the campaign, we had tripled what we were looking for, and needed every fucking dime.
Yes, exactly. So say at the end of it, you ended up probably underestimating how much money you needed to make
Yeah,
the movie.
yeah. I mean, luckily, the audience came out in spades,
Yeah.
but it was an expensive shoot, which also Kevin would never let me live down. It's like, I made Clerks for $24,000, and that was a whole ass movie.
But that was Clerks. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's like, and you
Come on,
spending
Kevin.
how much on a short?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but I got to shoot in a plane. I don't have any friends who have planes. You know a guy at a convenience store.
You're not a stewardess in an airplane that you just get to happen. Hey guys, we're gonna shoot a film while we're flying here, so don't worry.
It's all good. It's all good. I got the keys to the hangar. We're just gonna dip in after hours. We'll be out before American needs this plane.
We'll just hang a sheet over the entire thing so people think we're in sky. Don't worry about it.
It's all good. It's all good.
But I laugh on that same episode of Travis Gibb mentioned that he tried to go into the TV and movie industry and realized that he goes, I don't know what kind of credit cards Kevin Smith had, but I couldn't get those credit cards. Kevin Smith special credit cards to make Clerks. But yeah, so it's Splinter. So you wrapped everything and you're now
it's done. We're playing festivals. We just finished playing the Pan African Film Festival in LA. We have some pretty good news that I can't talk about just yet about another film festival. We're going to be playing it in the spring. We're definitely bringing it to Comic-Con in the summer. But yeah, I can't wait to share it. And I feel bad. I consistently feel bad that the Kickstarter backers have not gotten to see it yet. And it's because the festival nonsense. It's like they want it to not have been exposed to the wideness of the world yet. They want to have some sense that, if you wanted to see this movie, here's the only way you could see this movie. And so sending it to, 4,000 Kickstarter backers is a little contrary to that impulse. But I can't wait. I can't wait for the people who helped make this possible to see what they made possible.
And you're showing it, so people out there who are Kickstarter backers know that there is something. Whereas, like, the number of times people have backed Kickstarters where nothing's been seen of it, you don't even know if it's actually been made. We can at least rest in knowing that there's something out there.
We did the thing. It's all done. I swear to God.
It's there. Don't worry. It has to be flown. That's Absolutely. What you should do. You should do a screening for some of these people on a plane.
There you go.
Well, big screen in the beginning part of it. There you go.
Or just put them all on a plane and pipe it into their phones the way you now watch movies on a plane anyway.
In a hangar. Don't pay for don't fly it. That's a waste of gas and waste.
Yeah, come on, guys.
But so Splinter, is there now the creation and the completion of this? Is this like fueled the want for more? Or is this like you did it now and you're ready to just see what happens in the future?
If you had asked me like on day 3 of production, I'd have been like, I don't want to ever do this again. This is hard. And I don't know how people do this on a bigger scale. Like in the middle of that, I was like, how do you make a James Bond movie? Yeah. How do you do this for 9 months?
Yeah.
Like it's exhausting being here for 3 days. And it's just us knuckleheads in this set. Can you imagine like being helicopters and drone shots and you got to blow up this train? And I couldn't manage to work my way around mentally what that's like. But on the other side of it, I think it's I don't ever want to pretend like I understand what childbirth is like, but what I do understand is that pain is a temporary sensation. Otherwise there would only ever be only children.
Yes.
You have to be able to forget how bad it was to move on to and enjoy and embrace how great it can be. And so I have to think that you forget how bad the pain of production is because people make more than one movie, because they love it, because there's something about it that continues to sort of fuel that thing. And I remember, and I couldn't quite put it to words until I heard this interview with Austin Butler talking about being in his first Quentin Tarantino movie, because he's in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah. And he said, like, I'm on set this one day and, we shoot our scene and Quentin's like, you know what? I think we got it, everybody. But you know what? We're going to do one more. You know why? And the entire cast and crew says, like with one voice, because we fucking love making movies.
Yes.
And so that feeling of like, look what we're getting to do, you guys. We're getting to make a fucking movie.
Yes.
Um,
You're lucky enough to do that. Like, I have a friend who is or acquaintance from the podcast who is working on funding on Kickstarter his first short film. He's the one that did all the recuts of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He did a recuts of it and made it into a 2-hour movie. He's also now doing the Kickstarter thing, and it's like one of those things. It's just so hard to get people to back you, and then you have to do it. But like, now that you've done it, and once we see it all, I think most people are gonna be like, okay, he knows what he's doing. Well, we've seen things you've worked on, so it's not like we don't have a taste of what you get to do.
It is, but it's also like Michael Jordan was not a great baseball player. Like, sometimes those are two disciplines that don't necessarily cross over.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was very glad to be able to have had a crew that knew exactly what they were doing, to the cast who came to play, and to have people who believed and donated time and money and effort and talent to make a dumb kid's dream come true. And so I won't get that the next time. Next time it's just got to be good.
Yes. and so for people who don't know, how long is a short film? How long is the runtime?
Our runtime is, with credits, 16 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
It was my producer like kept trying to make it shorter, simply because she knew as going to film festivals, they like shorts to be short. And even Kevin said a short can always be shorter. Like, there's you don't have to overstay your welcome. Like, get in, tell your story, get out. Like, a short is a joke. It's set up and it's punchline. And if you're doing more than either of those things, you're kind of overstaying your welcome. And I've sort of taken that to heart. A short can always be shorter. You're not telling a 3-act structure. You're telling setup, punchline.
And that's perfect. I honestly think that as you have talked about, you and Kevin, so I'm much more attentive to 16 minutes than I am 3.5 hours of a movie. So I'd rather watch a bunch of 16-minute movies than 3.5. When I see 3.5 hours, when I'm going through the internet and looking at movies, I'm like, oh God, why do I have to watch this thing? Yeah. I see an hour and a half. I'm like, yes.
It's like, I'm gonna.
Like, Babylon was like that. I'm like, I really need to watch this movie, but it's 3 hours and 10 minutes. I don't know if I want to watch that much. And I'm so glad I did, because it was just, at the end of it, I just was like, what the hell did I just watch? And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
And that's what art is supposed to do, right? It challenges you just enough.
Yes, exactly. So you have that, obviously that's on the horizon. You got this. I love, and I've said this to a couple people on the podcast before, which is, if you can tell me everything that you're doing, you don't have anything on the horizon, because if you're going to say everything, that means there isn't that one thing you can't say. And so obviously we all know you always have something you're working on that you can't talk about. So there is things coming out, though, we should look at with your name on it, correctly?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely sure when Batman Caped Crusader is going to be a thing people can watch. I know they're still making Batman Caped Crusader. Which is the Bruce Timm, Ed Brubaker animated follow-up to Bruce Timm's, Batman the Animated Series. And so I wrote an episode of that, which was so much fun. There's a show that I'm working on now with Kevin, who he has not said what it was, but I can say at the very least that much, that Kevin Smith and I are doing a TV show together, which is going gangbusters. It's been so much fun. And then there's some other stuff that's in the can that's waiting for the people to decide they want to tell other people what it is. There's going to be more work done on that untitled World War II set Captain America Black Panther game that I worked on a few years ago, and have been working on ever since, because games apparently take forever to make. And so there's even more work to be done on that, and I'm not entirely sure what a release date is. I'm not sure when they're going to say what their title is. All I can say is it's so damn fun, awesome. and a crazy weird sort of place to find myself in, which is, I love video games, have loved them for longer than I've loved comics, and so for this to be my debut is fucking Captain America and Black Panther getting to punch each other and Nazis. That sounds like a win.
I want to play it right now. Let's go. Let's do it. So that's awesome. So one last thing before we go, any thing we should be looking forward to? Like, what's your any Oscar picks you got going here that you want to like shred out there a little bit?
You know, I feel as if, and I know this is probably, you know, it's not going on a limb to say I feel like Ke Huy Quan is going to win
Mm-hmm.
Best Supporting Actor, because the thing that having covered the Oscars for 20 years as a journalist, it is abundantly clear to me that it is never about what the best movie is. It's about what the best narrative
Mm-hmm.
around the movie is, you know. And I don't think that Everything Everywhere All at Once is going to win Best Picture, despite the fact that I love it to death. I don't
Yes.
think Michelle Yeoh is going to win Best Actress, even though she 100% should.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the narrative around Ke Huy Quan is strong enough that that will be the one. If it's going to win one of those, you know, 4 top awards,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably going to be that one, you know. And I think Jamie Lee Curtis also has a pretty decent shot at Best Supporting Actress.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pulling so fucking hard for that movie, and have been since like February. I saw it a year ago.
Yes.
Because
It, it
I love it to death.
it's everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah. What else can you say?
Can't say anything else. I love it. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know why. This year was my year of actually purposely trying to watch Oscar films, like films that we put up for Oscars, because I just feel like in the past I've always like watched what's popular, and then I get to the Oscars, I'm like, I wonder who's up for an Oscar, and I'm always like, okay, I've seen one of these movies.
Right.
And so we should probably get into it. So this year I actually went in there. I was like, okay. And then like I see Oscar nods and I'm like, okay, I've seen 90% of them. I'm actually pretty good this year.
I got this.
I got this. Like, I don't know who's going to win what, but like I can tell you that if they win, I can be like, I've seen that. I can know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So,
it's always about, it's not like popularity contest. It's more like, what does Hollywood want us to think they think about themselves?
mm-hmm.
You know, and then what story can everybody kind of rally around? Like Brendan Fraser's story is a great story.
Mm-hmm.
Like The Whale, I haven't seen The Whale. I don't really have a desire to see The Whale. I think it's getting dinged a bit for most of what it is, which is, made a movie about a fat guy. There's no fat people making a movie, and the fat suit and all that is a little bit, you know, not great. But everybody loves Brendan Fraser. Like everybody loves that guy. They love his path and they love his journey, and that he found his way back to doing great work at this period in his life. That's the narrative that I think that voters can get behind and be like, well, the movie, whatever. That guy, though, okay.
And that's the way the world turns.
Indeed.
But yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So you've got, we just to recap here, Adora in the Distance, available ComiXology and trade format or graphic novel format at Dark Horse. You can get it where books are sold, as well as you can get it at your local comic book shop. If they don't have it, let them know, because they can order it and get it in on their next order for comic books, as well as Census on ComiXology. Yep. And if you don't, if you have an Amazon Prime account, I believe you get to read ComiXology for nothing, right? Is that true?
Yeah, it's like a Kindle Amazon joint forces task force thing where they basically give you everything for free.
So if you don't, if you're one of the few people in the world who don't have Amazon Prime, then you can purchase it. But if you do have Amazon Prime, you should definitely read it.
Yeah.
And then wait for that to come out.
It's also free.
Okay, there you go. And then get Census on Dark Horse when that comes out in the graphic novel format as well, trade format as well. And be on the lookout for Splinter, because I'm excited, as most people who are fans of Mark's, to see this as well. You're on Instagram, right?
Yes.
Have you been in the crazy world of Twitter?
I've abandoned Twitter. I check in every now and again when somebody sends me a link to look at, but I don't need that much in my life anymore, and I'm better for it.
But it's at Marc Bernardin on Twitter as well. And obviously, when are you guys going to do another Fat Man Beyond? When's Kevin going to be back?
Kevin, you know, nursing a fledgling movie theater is an all-encompassing task. And so, you know, I think that you know, he feels like once it's on its own 2 feet, once it doesn't require the presence of Kevin Smith to help sell everything, he might go back to being a bit more bi-coastal. But I don't know when that is. I don't know when his threshold of success is. But I, you know, I'm going back east for the Ides of March, which is, you know, as the name would suggest, starting the 15th of March. I'm going to show a couple of movies, talk about why they mean stuff to me, and probably tack on a Fat Man Beyond while I'm there. And and I also might bring a little movie with me. So
Weird.
if you were on the fence about going to see any of these things, then I don't know.
Maybe
I'm
show
just
up.
saying, maybe show up.
Did anybody tell Kevin it was hard to run a movie theater?
I'm sure they did, but I'm sure
because he listens to people all the time. So
yeah. La, 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 la.
I honestly, it's empowered. It's thought made me think to the point where I'm like listening to you guys have conversations about like showing Iron Man and doing things like that. And I was just like, hey, it makes me want to do that in this area. And then I realized that I was like, yeah, but I don't have the money to spend on something like this right now.
Yeah, like it's the like rich nerd's dream
yes.
to like buy your own movie theater and then program whatever you want.
I'm just assuming that there's enough people who are nerds like myself who would want to see the movies that I want to put on. You buy that, I'm gonna end up having to put on all the movies that I don't want to see, but people will buy tickets too.
yeah, not everybody gets to be Quentin Tarantino and the New Beverly, and just what, I'm gonna program whatever the fuck I want. If you're lucky, you might cross over with me, and if not, well, it's 7 Brides for 7 Brothers for 3 days, you guys. Yes. Good luck.
But in the meantime, are you going to be doing some more Black Man Beyonds, or is it just going to be static over there at the Fat Man Beyond Studios?
It's always a matter of like, I think we'll get into it a bit more. The winter is always a dark era. Like once you get past your Avatars and then your bunch of Oscar movies, which we don't really talk about. Now we're cresting back into like, oh, all right, I got Ant-Man to talk about, which I still have to talk about. We're going to get to Creed 3. We're going to get to John Wick 4. Yeah. Then we start getting into the craziness of the summer movie season. So hopefully we'll have Kev back for that. But if not, then I'll definitely hop on the mic and fill the void.
We got The Mandalorian too coming up, season 3, right?
Got Mando coming up. I got to talk about the finale of Last of Us pretty soon. There's stuff happening. Yes, Ted Lasso is coming back.
Oh gosh, March 15th. I literally have that like on my wife and I's calendar. There's just like doctor's appointments and things like that. That's on there.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. And she was like sitting next to me, I think, when I found it when they posted it online on the couch, and it just like obviously it goes bing, lets her know that's a calendar thing, and she's like, oh my god. I'm like, see, that's how I was gonna tell you that it's coming back, or they've announced the season, because they were like, oh, spring, and I'm like, I hate when they do that. Spring to me, it's not that. And it's not even technically spring, is it?
No, it's still winter.
Yeah. So, well, in Maine here, it's winter till June, so it's fine. We're
It's always winter.
Yes. So obviously, go on Twitter Instagram and follow at Marc Bernardin. Look for his name, search it on Google, find all the great things about him. And the reason I wanted to have you on here today, Mark, just to let you know, I wanted to talk Adora the Resistance, I want to talk Census, and I want to talk Splinter, because you can't say anything bad about those.
Well, people can.
If anybody has listened to Fat Man Beyond, Mark technically have the tendency to talk bad about something.
I never talk negatively. I talk critically.
Critically, I should say. Sorry, it's hard for you to promote your own products and talk critically about it. So this is an opportunity for.
I will always tell you the shots that I didn't get in Splinter. That's all I ever see when I watch. Like, oh man, I wish we had that shot. Oh damn, I wish we had that thing.
It would have been a feature film though.
I know, would have been. Now it's a short.
Yes, exactly. So check it out. And like I said, Splinter will be around. And I'm guessing at some point people will be able to buy it via download and all that stuff too at some point, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for sure we're going to send that out to Kickstarter backers and they're going to get exactly what they paid for. I don't know after that. I don't know if it'll be a thing we charge for. I don't know if it's a thing we just put up for free, because how much more money do I need? How much more can I ask for people from it? Like now it becomes a universal good. Just put it out into the world. If people want to watch it, they can watch it. But I haven't crossed that particular bridge yet, or burned it yet. Either way, but we'll figure it out.
Buy Mark's comic books and you get to watch it for free.
There you go. It's incentive now.
Incentive. I really appreciate you coming on, chatting and talking and talking about your stuff. Keep up the great work. We're big fans over here, and we'll always look for the new thing and the next big thing for you, and keep it up, and all the things behind the scenes that you work on too, that you're in the producer's room or whatever. Keep that up and keep up the hard work.
Oh, thanks, man. This has been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a blast. So again, thank you at Marc Bernardin on Instagram, and then obviously look for his stuff on ComiXology. Just type in Marc Bernardin on
there's Google, a bunch of stuff to read.
Amazon. Yeah, there is. So check it out. I've got a couple of them here. Look at this. Push.
Oh, nice.
Highwayman.
Ooh, genius.
Genius. And then over there, it's hard to see, but over there is Planet Symbiote, the
Marvel.
Marvel.
There it is. Hey,
You can get those at Midtown Comics. I found those on Midtown Comics.
nice job.
There you go. Right. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thank you. Be good.